¿Qué tal? Bienvenidos a este espacio del segundo encuentro internacional de la Red de Ecología Acústica México. Ya en su última jornada vamos a iniciar actividades académicas justamente con la presentación del artista y también investigador Garth Paine, quien forma parte del cuerpo de profesores e investigadores de Arizona State University, y que él nos acompaña justamente con el tema de Ecología Acústica 2.0, Acoustic Ecology 2.0, y a quien voy a presentar en un momento. Bienvenido, Garth. Welcome, Garth. How are you?
Good morning. Very good. Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to introduce your bio in English and then in Spanish, so because we have a bilingual audience there. Y nuestra emisión será en inglés y usted puede dejar sus mensajes, sus preguntas en el chat de nuestro canal de YouTube, que lo puede ver en justamente, si lo busca a través de, si usted está viéndolo por supuesto, pero si no, en el canal de YouTube de Ecología Acústica México, la Red de Ecología Acústica México. Entonces, yo quisiera introducir al profesor y artista Garth Paine, que nació en el 62 de Estados Unidos y de Australia, tiene doble nacionalidad, es un compositor, también hace presentaciones como performer, es también un académico. Él fue galardonado con el Green Room Award de Outstanding Creativity de Escape Velocity, Company in Space, y fue finalista del Best New Musical Score para baile en Australia en 2014. En 2018, Garth fue un investigador y creativo, investigador creador en residencia en el IRCAM y también en el ZKM, que son los lugares, los espacios más prestigiosos a nivel mundial para hacer desarrollo creativo en el ámbito de las artes digitales. Y también desarrolló el Future Perfect for Spatial Audio, Cell Phones and VR, un proyecto que busca que la audiencia y el espacio de concierto trabajen como un ecosistema completo. También fue conferencista magistral en NIME 2016 y en 2014 también fue conferencista magistral en Acoustic Ecology Conference y hablando del espacio para escuchar. El Dr. Paine es un profesor asociado en Digital Sound and Interactive Media y un profesor asociado en composición en Arizona State University, y es el fundador de Listen, un proyecto que también codirige Acoustic Ecology Lab, y su música, sus composiciones han sido presentadas internacionalmente. Tenemos también aquí algunos de los links que él nos propone para seguir su trabajo profesional, y yo espero que nuestro equipo de producción lo pueda también compartir con todos ustedes en el chat que tenemos ahorita de YouTube. I'm going to say briefly your bio in English now, Garth. Garth Paine, USA Australian-born, 1962, is a composer, performer, and scholar. He was awarded a Green Room Award for Outstanding Creativity for Escape Velocity, Company in Space, and was a finalist for the Best New Musical Score for Dance in Australia in 2014. In 2018, Garth was research artist in residence at IRCAM ZKM, developing Future Perfect for Spatial Audio, Cell Phones, and VR. This is a project that sought to make the audience and the concert work an ecosystemic whole. He presented the keynote at NIME 2016 and a keynote at Acoustimology's 2014 conference on listening to place. Dr. Paine is an associate professor of digital sound and interactive media and associate professor of composition at Arizona State University. He is the founder of the Listen project and founder and co-director of the Acoustic Ecology Lab at Arizona State University, and his music has been performed internationally. And Garth, your links are already on the chat, so people can go and check your work. And yo voy a regresar entonces a indicar nada más que su conferencia es Acoustic Ecology 2.0, Ecología Acústica 2.0. And Garth, please welcome and go ahead.
Hola, buenos días. It's a great pleasure to be here. So I will just share my screen with you to share with you some slides. So indeed, I want to talk today about the modalities of listening, and I have enjoyed greatly the discussions that have gone on so far during the conference and the extraordinary production work that's been happening. I wanted to first express my gratitude to you for inviting me here today and to share in your discussion, and also my gratitude to the Indigenous peoples of the land on which we reside and on which we are present right now. So I want to talk about the concept of ecology in terms of acoustic ecology and my great passion for the promotion of the notion of acoustic ecology. And I want to talk today about listening particularly and the concepts of ecological listening. And to do that, I'm going to use a Tibetan Buddhist idea of dependent arising. So Buddhism teaches us that that phenomena have no intrinsic existence. That is, they cannot exist in and of themselves. And this brings forth a frame which is referred to as dependent arising. And there are two really classic examples of that. The first being the car. And we talk about cars. And if we go and look for the very essence of car, we can pull apart the car and find bolts and nuts and wheels and electronics, but we never find car. The other would be, for instance, a loaf of bread. And so we have the bread. And again, if we dissect that, we might find that there's flour and water and yeast. But equally, we might start to think about the fact that the flour comes from a farm that has been milled, that has been baked, that has been brought to the shop. And we start to think about this really wide network of people and activities that are involved in producing this phenomena that sits in front of us for our breakfast, this loaf of bread. So I wanted to bring some of these ideas to an inquiry into what might be ecological about listening and why I think the term acoustic ecology is so critically important. So this leads me to think not just then of sound as a signifier, not just of sound as material like we might think of in art or in music composition, not just as sound as data and not just sound as voice, whether that's the individual voice of a bird or whether it's the voice of the landscape itself. But it leads me to think of sound as fundamentally ecosystemic. Now, if we add to that the fact that our perception, the kind of material of our mind, is in itself a construction, and that construction is conditioned by our cultural background, our life experiences, our expectations, our immediate situation, and a plethora of other qualities, the temperature on our skin, etc., etc. Then we can start to think that actually, when we put these things together, that sound itself is a really unique form of experience and perception. And that it forms a kind of gestalt, a singular expression of all existence. When we are sitting in a canyon listening early in the morning, we are hearing the entire environment at that point, and our perception brings with it our entire life history. So it's really a cumulative expression of the now, of this very point in time. And it's interesting because it's a phenomena that's both in time, that is now, that is the very moment of listening, and outside of time or without time. And I would express that by thinking about when we go to a concert, for instance, or we sit and listen for several hours, we come away with a singular sense of that entire duration. And we can unpick that, we can unpick the concert and talk about the various pieces that we enjoyed, but we have a sense of the whole thing without time, actually. So it's an accumulation of the sonic condition over time, and it becomes really an embodied memory, a part of our cellular makeup. So then part of the question that we might ask is, why does this matter? And I would say that acoustic ecology encapsulates all of these ideas. It's actually then about listening to the whole, not listening to the voice of an individual in the landscape, not listening to the reverberation of a canyon or of a city, etc., but listening to the whole as a singular. And it encapsulates this notion of interdependence, of coexistence, of codependencies, and so on, that I used the Buddhist frame to start to think about. I love the way that Stephen Feld touches on this in his work, particularly in Papua New Guinea, and he's really talking then about the phenomenology of sensing place. And this is, in my view, a very beautiful quote. So he's saying, as place is sensed, senses are placed. And I really love the idea that this gives us a sense that we put our listening, our smell, our touch sensations out into the environment, into the very place that we're trying to understand. And then as places make sense, senses make place. And this points towards the notion that we're constructing our perception of the place that we're listening in the moment of our listening. And so then he made this term acoustimology, which I'm sure most of you know, and talks of one sonic way of knowing and being in the world, and how sounding and the sensual body experiencing of sound is a special kind of knowing. And it's these points that I think are so critical to the idea of ecological listening. It brings us back to understanding ourselves as ecology, as inseparable from the ecology of the world at large, that there are no binaries, no seams, no barriers, no lens through which we're looking, but a singular common domain which arises dependent on all the other phenomena. As Feld says, a special kind of knowing. And this is, I think, uniquely expressed through sound. Of course, our thinking gets us into trouble, particularly in the West, in that it establishes us as separate, as a kind of exceptionalism with a vertical hierarchy, and we're always at the top of this hierarchy. And this inherently problematizes the entire practice even of listening, because it makes us separate from the sound, separate from the sounding sources to which we're listening. Thich Nhat Hanh also says beautifully, only when we recognize our connectedness to the earth can real change begin. And he's talking here not of change to the world, changing carbon values or whatever, but actually change to ourselves, to understand that we are fundamentally part of the ecology and not separate from it. So I'd like to do just a very, very short listening exercise with you, if you don't mind. I'd like you to close your eyes for 1 minute, and I'd like you to go to a place that you like the sound of and listen to that place. Listen to the broad environmental quality. Hear the detail of the unique sounds that are there, and feel your presence there, listening. Okay, I'll call you back because we have not much time this morning. So you were listening. And I suggest to you that you just visited a sonic memory because of the atmosphere of that place. The atmosphere is a product of the environmental sonic signature and is the quality that makes you feel present in that place. It's an experience that is a product of the atmospheric sonic signature of that place and your relationship to it, your grandmother's kitchen, your favorite beach, wherever you went to listen. And so that shows us several things. It shows us that that listening experience stays with it. And that's important, really important, because we think of sound as temporal, we think of it as ephemeral, but actually we just prove to ourselves that sound is persistent, that sound actually changes our cellular makeup, and that that experience of listening resides in the body as a cumulative experience over our lifetime. I think the Swedish geographer Haggerstrand also comments on this in a very beautiful way. He says, the big tapestry that nature is weaving is woven because all things have a temporal vector that enmesh. And here this concept of enmeshment brings us back to the idea of interdependence, codependence, etc. He neatly actually sums up the entire idea of ecology. So how do we listen ecologically? I would suggest that we listen without classification, that we listen with our entire being. And we might refer to this as passive listening, or Pauline Oliveras might refer to this as the global mode, or Shion might refer to this as reduced listening, for instance, and that we listen relationally, that we're listening, in fact, to the entire gestalt of the here and now. And I want to introduce a term that I coined a few years ago, somaphony. And somaphony is a term that I put forth in 2014 at the Ecomusicologies conference, which is made up of soma, which is the subtle body, and phony, as in sound. And so this is a concept of subtle body listening, listening with the whole body, or in fact the whole being, not separating out the senses, hearing, sight, touch, smell, etc., but in fact just listening with the entire being. And it comes out of a practice of long durational recording and listening, where I might lie on the ground recording, which is how I normally record, and be there for several hours. And during that time, you know, the rocks underneath your back hurt and things happen. And slowly over time, all of those things disappear. And if you just persist at being still and being present, you become more and more present. And over time, the body kind of disappears and you just become a consciousness listening at that place. And so this idea really touches on being present, and it's a kind of meditation on truly being present. How fully can I be present? Of listening to the whole, of the relationships between the scales of sound and the energy of the earth, of the density of the air, the environmental impact on the voices, the way in which the bird reverberates around the canyon, etc. And also a reflection on the psychoacoustic construction that I'm making at that time of listening, the phenomenology, for instance, of the experience of listening. Now, I brought a bunch of these ideas into my own creative work, and here's a list of some compositions that are particularly using field recordings and trying to bring this sense of located and ecological listening to audiences. And I'll touch on another one later. But it's particularly important for me to help engage broader community in listening, and the way in which listening can act as a really powerful way to build agency over environments in which we live and over climate change, and to build a degree of stewardship over these places. To that extent, some years ago now, I founded the Listen Project, which is Listen to the Power of N, meaning listening in many places. And it's a project that seeks to bring together the community as key partners in listening, but also in recording and documenting change in environments. And then you can see here the way in which the listening practices and the field recording practices lead to a whole range of research in community engagement, in psychoacoustics, in wellness and health and wellness, and critical discourses around acoustic ecology. We do that by engaging in three areas: exploration, experience, and engagement. And in exploration, we really run workshops in the communities, in the national parks, on listening, on field recording, on storytelling, and we produce creative works with those communities around the field recordings that they've made. Experience, where we make this material online and we raise the profile of acoustic ecology more broadly in terms of thinking about how we are in the world and how we might think about our impact upon the broader global condition. And then we engage people through the development of tools and facilities and through stewardship. So we're really using sound as a way to empower the community to engage in some of the greatest challenges of our time. Here is, for instance, the website, and you can see here under experience, access to the Listen database and all of the sounds that our communities record, we tag, and then we upload to the database so they're accessible to anybody to listen to. And because they're tagged, you can search them and find particular characteristics. But that tagging also leads to scientific research, which allows us to look at the occurrence of particular events and to use that sound to develop other kinds of tools, which I'll talk about in a moment. We also develop concerts with the communities and take those back into the community. This is a multi-channel performance at Joshua Tree with the community using field recordings that they made over a period of several years. And then because this, we now have a huge database of field recordings with community members making recordings for us every month in the same location, we've started to try and look at how can we analyze and build tools out of these recordings that allow us to look at climate change and use sound itself as a tool to map climate change. And the Ecosonic project has developed both an acoustic diversity measure to look at changes in species density over time, and a tool that actually looked at the correlation between weather data and psychoacoustic parameters. And we found extremely strong, significant relationships between our acoustic diversity measure and cloud cover, wind speed and temperature, and inverse relationships between the acoustic diversity measure and acoustic and dew point and visibility. In other words, the psychoacoustic parameters of the sound are extremely tied to weather patterns or to weather conditions, and therefore are in fact can be used as a really strong indicator of climate impact in these environments. And here, for instance, is some of the early developments where we were using it as a predictive tool to look at the psychoacoustic properties of an environment at a future date. And you can see here the blue line being the predictive value, that it follows very closely the actual data from that date as captured. So we're using this database that the community have built in order to develop scientific tools that allow us to look at climate impact over a period. And then I'm just going to finish off by talking about some of my creative work, or a particular piece here, Future Perfect, which I developed at EARCAM in Paris and ZKM in 2018. And continue to develop there. And this piece uses everybody's cell phones in order to think about the audience not as a passive receiver, but actually as a key part of the concert and of the musical work. And that means that the audience themselves become part of the ecology of the work. And I'll just play you a tiny bit of a video, which you can find at the URL listed at the bottom of the screen here, which discusses those concepts a bit more thoroughly. I really wanted to bring the sound directly to you as a person so that you would feel that you were directly engaged in the performance. And so thinking about that, obviously everybody carries a smartphone and the smartphone's capable of producing sound. And so then I started thinking, well, so everybody in the audience has a loudspeaker in their pocket. And if we could build some software that allowed me to dynamically send sound to those phones and spatialize it across the audience, then we could actually really engage the audience directly as a participant in the performance. And so this kind of changes the perspective so that the sound is not just out here in a nice sound field, but it's actually really quite intimate when it's with you. So we don't really have time to look at more of that, but the principal ideas that are going on there are really about developing an ecosystem of listening within the audience. There are many projects in the Acoustic Ecology Lab that are looking at ways in which we embed these practices in the community. And I thank you very much for listening. Muchas gracias.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Garth, for this presentation. I think you let us feeling like we could do this kind of a emotional soundscape, personal soundscapes going for a little longer, and sharing some of the main concepts that you're trying to bring over. It's very interesting, you know, because yes, you are including participants as also part of the, you know, let's say performers of the work, like with this last project you just shared with us. And from your research also, this deep thinking around what is ecological listening, what we can really think about. It's going beyond just paying attention, but to really try to get immersed into a different set of values regarding our place on Earth, I think, through listening through the whole body as well, you know. So this concept of somaphony, I found it very interesting as well. And this question that you start with, and I think has been one of the main reflection that has been going transversal to the whole conference, which is, why does this matter? I think that's very important.
Right. Yeah, I think it matters a lot, and hopefully I communicated that as we think about ecology, as we think about, you know, ecological listening, as we think about the breaking down of these hierarchies that we're so practiced at implementing, the humans are always at the top. Then simultaneously, we break down a lot of other things. We break down the fact that I'm a professor in the university and the members of the community are not in the university. So the point being that we're all together, we're all part of the ecology. So we end up with a much more rhizomic way of thinking and of structuring the work we do and engaging the community as equal partners. And so a lot of those barriers get dissolved by thinking in this way. And in my view, it produces much, much more powerful work. And then filters, of course, through to the fact that the community are making recordings, which is part of their practice. And those recordings become part of a very large database of sounds that of recordings that are over probably 6 or 8 years. And so now we have a kind of huge collection of data, which we're now building tools out of, which allow us to map climate impacts solely from the sound of an environment over time. And so I see, again, these kind of hierarchical things that we might separate out normally, you know, I do my community practice and then there's the science and then there's the art, and all of those things kind of get dissolved to be really a single expression of what it means to listen and to be present on the planet. And so I think there's really broad impact in changing the way that we think about these things.
Thank you, Garth. Well, we have some comments from Adam Hyan. Thanks, Garth, great presentation. Also Leo Cabrera Garcia. How could we be able to measure as national park managers conservation outputs for implementing this type of approaches? You have it there in the chat also if you want to read it. And there's also Jacob Smith saying, saying thank you to you. But what do you think about Leo Cabrera Garcia's comment?
Yes, Leo. We've been working on developing a set of software tools that will automatically analyze and plot psychoacoustic parameters from the sound recordings, which can be made just every month over a period of time, and then actually predict. I didn't have enough time to talk about this, but I showed a couple of predictions from that model, which allow us now to predict out, some 5 or 10 years in advance, what the psychoacoustic impacts are going to be on that environment of the sound. And this is possible, again, because we've been building up along a big database of regular recordings. And so I'd be delighted to talk with you about using those tools. And in addition to that, we've used analysis of these sounds to develop some automatic gunshot detection algorithms for protection of endangered species. And built some very small, very cheap electronics, which we're deploying with the Phoenix Zoo, to help protect endangered species. So we're looking at a number of these challenges that preserves have about how we can help. Really, all of this comes about through thinking about and practicing listening. So please write me. I'm really happy to talk with you more about that.
Okay, well, time is over now. I really appreciate your presentation. Since we talk planning for your being part of this conference, the theme of Acoustic Ecology 2.0 and community involvement, I think it was crucial for us to also know, what was going on. And, the other thing is like, what you just said opens up the door for some kind of a forensic approach to sound, which I think is, right, we will have that in common as well. Like, how can we use sound in order to get into what's going on the field, and maybe proceed through either legal or educational or other kind of tracks in order to solve certain problems through sound. Well, I appreciate, Garth, your presence here at Red Ecología Acústica Mexico. And thank you very much. And let's stay in touch.
Thank you also. I'm honored to be invited. Muchas gracias.